All right. Well, welcome everyone this evening to Exploring Ecumenical Possibilities for Anti-Racism. This is the second in our series of public panels as part of United's broader anti-racist initiatives. This event is co-sponsored by Anti-Racist Initiatives and the Ministry Lab. So I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to Reverend Emily Meyer for her collaboration in putting this together and imagining this event. And I also want to say thank you to Reverend Anna, Manny, and Reverend Kelly for being with us today. We will do some introductions here shortly, but I do want to briefly mention who is here, and I just kind of briefly mentioned, but Manny Lewis is a congregational organizer for racial justice for the Minneapolis Area Synod ELCA. Reverend Ana Kendick Flores is anti-racism coordinator for the Presbytery of the Twin Cities area, PCUSA. And Reverend Kelly Gallagher is Associate Conference Minister of the Minnesota Conference, UCC. And I am Dr. Gary Green. I'm Assistant Professor of Pastoral Theology and Social Transformation here at United and direct our anti-racist initiative. So welcome to you all and thank you for being here. Say a little bit about what this event is for. The purpose of this event, and particularly this iteration of this anti-racist conversation, is to explore the differences and dynamics of anti-racist work across denominations and communities based on the awareness that white supremacy lives in each of these spaces, albeit uniquely. We want to deconstruct it. We want to help folks understand it. We want to help communities learn to see it, and ultimately help our people develop the kind of racial intelligence that positions them to move intentionally and creatively in anti-racist discourse or directions to create anti-racist futures. And so this event is very much collaborative, both in terms of the conversation we will have and hopefully what will come out of this conversation in terms of collaboration. So I want us to have some time to get to know our panel. And so what I want to do now is I want to invite each of you to please tell us who you are, your current role, and a bit about your experience doing anti-racist work. And then with that, if you could describe the nature of anti-racist work you do and the communities or the people in relation to it, to who you do it. And I would invite you to go first, Manny.
Alrighty, hello everyone. My name is Manuel. I like going by Manny. It's just simple. I am the congregational organizer for racial justice at the Minneapolis Area Synod. So what that entails is me going to mostly a bunch of middle-class suburban white churches and talking about things like criminal reform, mostly right now. The experience is really unique because what my call is, I am brave enough to ask all of you white folks, do you want to be comfortable or accountable? It's a very different line. And most of you will go and do what they say, you have no problem going to the Capitol or doing legislative work, but you won't come to the neighborhood and talk to little Jamal or even worship in North Minneapolis with little Tasha and Tiana. You'll send a $5,000 check and say that we did our part and these are our partners and put pictures on your website, but it's a lot different, right? And the biggest thing that I try to bring to a lot of these meetings is, why are we talking about race and not God? We forget a lot of that when we do this work, and I'm kind of a token. I said it. So I try to make it quick. I'm almost done, but understanding my tokenism, I kind of know how to move, right? Mm-hmm. I'm this guy from the hood and I've been through all this bad stuff, and it's really good to put me out here in front of these open heart, but distant, emotional people. So I'm the guy that's good to take a picture with, but you're not really listening to what's happening. So you're not understanding what's going on in these communities. What you don't know is I've been an activist since I was 17. I'll be 35. I've in my mind, an idea has built a bike shop, a neighborhood community meal that's still happening from 18 to 35, right? So all of these things that I do, but I never looked at race, right? So in a nutshell, my biggest thing, again, is to ask and to call you up to accountability and for you to get out of that comfortable space. So getting you to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Thank you for that,
That's
man.
it.
Thank you and welcome
Thank you.
tonight. Reverend Anna, if you could go next, tell us who you are, your current role, and a bit about the work that you do and who you do it with.
Yeah, so I am Anna Kendig Flores, and I am a pastor who has mostly never worked in congregations directly. So I am often the guest preacher or a guest educator. But before I did anti-racism work, I actually was a interfaith and secular mental health and chemical dependency chaplain at the University of Minnesota Hospital. And so did that for about 8-9 years, and worked in the medical surge space, the palliative care, the pediatrics, and so on. And so really spent a lot of time just engaging with people out in the community. And because I was at the University of Minnesota Center, there were a lot of folks from a variety of backgrounds in that space, including people from all over the world, but also right in that neighborhood, which, as we all know, is very close to the Cedar Riverside area, where there's a lot of Somali folks in the community, indigenous spaces from Little Earth down the way, and so on and so forth. So all that to say, I've been drawn into this work because of my faith, because of my family, the Mexican Presbyterian side, the Greek Orthodox, Syrian, and Lebanese side, and the white folks that are in the mix too, and found myself trying to think about, how do we talk about, I really appreciate what you said, Manny, these things that feel secular in ways that are driven by our faith. And so I have always felt that the core of Jesus' call and message is liberation work. It is anti-racism work. It's just a new bit of language that we've found over time, because we created racism, right, before Jesus' time. And yet I do believe that that the gospel of grace does address that work.
Right.
So
Yeah.
all that to say, the work that I do is with the Presbyterian.
Different ways. I'm curious, Anna, I'll start with you this time. What would you say is unique about your approach to anti-racism work?
Well, I think one thing that I I didn't say in my introduction, but is true, is that I've been pursuing anti-racism work since college and seminary as kind of a piece that's been a thread in my ministry overall. In the hospital spaces, obviously, in healthcare, we need to be having that conversation too. And so moving to the presbytery actually was a space that allowed me to think more deeply about things that had been developing along the way. So one of the things I brought from that work that had been showing up is something I'm calling the anti-racist spiritual capacities. These aren't my own work. These are based on writers, wisdom teachers, activists of color across the spectrum of time and our communities, but really trying to think about, how do we embody something different? And I think we can think of that as like, oh, the capacities, spiritual practices, but actually I think it's deadly serious work. How do we show up in our bodies differently? Because racism starts with the body.
That's right.
And every act of violence comes out of our mouth or comes out of the energy that we have in ourselves. And so how do we shift from spaces of harm to spaces of healing and growth? So that is something that I specifically try to bring to this work, is thinking beyond the headspace of knowing and getting into sort of the gut level of how have we absorbed all of this, and how do we actually, when I say cleanse, I don't mean that in any sort of kind of baggage way, but just how do we release what needs to be released, and then take in the truth that has been kind of held back from us because of all these things that we're holding on to instead.
Yeah.
So,
I'm
yeah.
excited to come back to that too. And when we talk later on about just kind of the role of embodiment with anti-racism work, what white supremacy does to us in our bodies and such. So we're going to definitely dig into that a little deeper, but thank you for that. Kelly, we'll come to you next. What is unique about your approach, and what do you believe makes it effective?
Well, when I come to the work, I come as a white, raised working class racist family, with all the stories of racism that I grew up with. And the tapes that have played in my head that I've worked for years. So I come at it as someone who's doing the work and am not done.
Yeah.
And I think that when I come to other white people, and one of the questions we've had is, what do you say to people who say, I'm done?
Yeah.
I'm saying, that's great, because I'm not done.
Yeah.
And I think that can be effective for people, again, particularly in our churches. They don't want someone coming in and saying, this is how you do it. And I don't, all I can do is say, this is what I've learned from my colleagues. And I think that it can be effective. And even if it's not, I feel authentic and can continue.
Yeah.
And I can say honestly and truthfully that it's hard work, it's long work, and we can only do it together.
Yeah.
And I can speak as a white person to other white people, saying, you got to come. You got to shut up and show up. Listen, there's so much to learn. One of the tenets of white supremacy is having to know it all and control it all, and so I think that that's my approach very much is, for better or worse, I'm the white person who can say to other white people, y'all step back, right? In very compassionate and gentle ways when necessary.
Absolutely. But that position is so important. You know what I mean? Because when Manny's talking about showing up and being seen as a token, there's a certain level of truth that can be received from that, and there's a certain level of truth that white people are going to need to hear from somebody else who shares that cultural experience. So I can appreciate just being intentional about engaging that social location honestly, and then moving in relation to that. And what about you, Manny? What's unique about your approach, and why do you think it's effective?
Doc, I'm gonna get right to it. I think you said it. Honesty. I can show up to a space, and I know 10% of the white people don't give a damn. I know that 30% of the white people are ignorant to what's going on. I know another 20% is going along to get along, because let's be honest, especially in faith-based spaces, racial work is a hot thing right now. It's two things that's hot: LGBTQ plus, anti-racism work. There's a lot of people that have quote unquote jobs because of anti-racism work. So when you put me somewhere, the thing is, it doesn't matter where you put me. If you leave me there for long enough, I'm going to become great at it. So when I step into a space and I see that, damn, these are just jobs, this isn't actual work, I'm going to call you out. So when I go to your church and you have to do this thing, and you got to bring the black guy in, and this is what we're working on this month in the scripture. No, you're not. That's not what's happening here. If you actually want to know what's going on, I'll tell you. However, you got somebody in your family on drugs. You got somebody in your family that's in jail. You got somebody in your family that's still. You just white, and you're not even white. My perspective is I don't understand. This is how I see things. There's tall people and there's short people. And tall people get a lot of these disadvantages, right? So then if you can just explain it as everybody is great, and the tall people are always the ones that have all of the prejudice. Look at it from that perspective and stop going, well, I mean, a crime of opportunity is still a crime. Yeah, he got babies and a whole nother 2 kids and somebody in the house, and he doesn't have a job. Yeah, he went to Target and stole diapers. Then it looks different, right? So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I think my advantage is I don't know what happened to my brain. It broke in a way where I just don't understand race. It's stupid to me, right? I'm like, oh, that's a person. That's a person. It's like when you see a woman. I'm a single man. Like, I don't care what color she is. She's gorgeous. Like, where in life am I gonna? She's too light. They don't make sense to me. And I think that being in a space where I can call these things out, because that's the truth, and not run from that thing, is the unique thing. Because then you have people come up and they say, listen, man, I don't understand what's happening, but you spoke from the heart. Maybe we can have a one-on-one and have a coffee. Cool. Then I can teach you more and you can know more. And I think that's how we grow instead of looking at this thing like, I'm Black, give me stuff because you did me wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm white, I feel guilty. As soon as I give you something, I'm gonna feel better. And then I'll only do it when I feel better again, instead of us learning relationships.
Yeah.
Like, when do we get to the relationship?
I'm trying not to jump too far off script, but I told you all, we were talking, we cheated. We had conversation the other day and it was generative off the rip. So anyway, but when we're talking about the comedic and talking about thinking about this conversation outside the context of morals, where people oftentimes get hung up, so we can see what the reality is and call it what it is. And I can appreciate what you just said about how it's stupid, it's silly. Race as a social construct is a silly, absurd myth. And it's a myth that has been materialized over centuries. And so I think there's value in not only responding to the material consequences of racism and white supremacy, and there's value in terms of our educational capacities and ways of being stretched and having our perspectives changed. There's value to being able to help people see the absurdity of the thing in the first place, right? Those things can be true at the same time. We can acknowledge that this is a myth, that it is silly, and we can acknowledge that it has to be taken seriously because of the material consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. Kelly, I want to come back to you, and I want to ask you, what do you believe some of the biggest cultural challenges to building anti-racist futures are from your perspective? And so we're thinking not just ecumenically now, but also culturally. What are some of the biggest challenges, especially given what we're talking about right now in terms of helping people learn to see, responding to the material consequences and the challenges? And we know that at least everybody in this room means well and wants to do this work. And we know that well-meaning people oftentimes are the ones that are caught up perpetuating some of these realities. So from your vantage point, what are some of the biggest cultural challenges that we need to think about and address in this conversation?
Well, for me, one of the first ones, you already named it, is that we just don't see, we don't see the water that we're swimming in. You know, there's that joke about the fish, right? And the old fish comes by and says, the water's warm today. And the two young fish look at each other and say, what's water?
Yeah.
They never notice it and they don't see it. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And the work is working to see the world that we live in.
Right.
And it's intense and it's embodied. It's not, we were talking about, we want to do everything right here and see it intellectually, but we got to feel it and not want to control it. I think when we talk about the tenets of white-bodied supremacy, the need to control, the need to, especially the narrative, the need to be comfortable. So I only want to see it if I'm comfortable. We don't want to put ourselves in places that are uncomfortable. And I'm speaking from white perspectives, and I think also for folks of color, the expectation to go into places that aren't safe, emotionally. And I think that's white-bodied supremacy makes spaces unsafe for people, and the inability to be authentic,
Right.
in places. And just the common language that we try to create is just slow work.
Mhm.
And I think there's a short attention span in the culture that we live in.
Yeah.
To want to, and you said it, Manny, the churches are like, we did that last year. Why are we still talking about this? But this is the environment year, not the racism year, right? So those are some of the barriers that I see.
That last part, I think, really speaks to the misunderstanding that a lot of people have about the nature of this thing.
That's right.
That something that has taken centuries to perfect itself in this way, so that it functions operatively but unseen. And the thought that we can fix it with a workshop or with a week-long intensive about anti-racism. And so I think that I just appreciate you touching on that, because that I think demonstrates, or at least points to, the extent of the work that actually has to happen and the fact that it needs to be ongoing. Manny, what are some of the biggest challenges you see from your vantage point and the work that you do?
Man, Simplicity is the hardest thing in the world.
Yeah.
None of us are different. Not you, not you, not you, not you, not you, not you. Why can't we work together? And then we're doing it in a faith-based space. Why are we talking about race and why are we not talking about God? I don't understand when you send me somewhere to stand in front of a group of people and tell them how challenging North Minneapolis is when they got their same challenges. But you showed up to a workshop because you want to make you want to have productivity and you want to progress. So why are we not talking about the deeds and the works that we need to get done? Because that's what matters. Stop using the hardest thing in doing this work is it's all about skin and not about God. I don't know any other way to say that. The ethics go out the window, the morals go out the window. Oh man. Ooh. Man, I don't know if I should say this. I'm gonna get in trouble or whatever. Here we go. So you are a 65-year-old male and you're white and you've been doing civil work stuff for 45 years. And me and you sitting in the room talking, having a conversation about writing a blog, right? And you upper echelon, so you work next to the special person. And you go, I'm in the South, it's white people here and white people there. They say nigger this, nigger that. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
What do I do now?
Yeah.
Because you connected to the person that sent me out to do this work. And for damn sure you wouldn't have did this to no pastor. You would have never said this. And I still got to get up and not mess up this person because they getting ready to exit. So I'm not going to be the person that's going to like cause a hissy fit or throw a temper tantrum because I have a certain amount of grace to let this woman exit. But thank you for showing me who you were. And now I still got to get up. But all of that civil, quote unquote, rights work you did for them 45 years went out the window as soon as you went nigga this, nigga that.
Yeah.
And I got to wake up every day and live with people like that.
Yeah.
So let me try to sum it up on my chatterbox. The hardest thing is knowing that some people are never not gonna see color. So they can't go in and see God because it's not about color. All of the workshops, all of the panels, all of the programs we do don't mean shit if we do not understand that it's not about skin and it's about God.
What do you do though, Manny, with the fact that even God has been erased
Yes.
historically?
That's
I
right.
mean, when we
What did
talk,
Jesus do?
well, and that's fair, but and this is good because there are, I mean, you know this too. There are multiple narratives about even who Jesus was, right? So if we're going to have a conversation that assumes that we can be on the same page about God, we still have to work through all of this racial stuff that has been built up over years, where when you talk about Jesus being a brown person, folks are still up in arms about that. And it's just like,
So Doc, how we get to anywhere if we keep going? It's us and then it's y'all.
well, yeah.
If we can't get a single group of people to just understand that, hey, I might not even like you, but I love you. People so worried about being liked. This is about God. That's the thing, right? And
No.
So if this is about God, who told your ass I gotta like you?
That's right.
I just gotta love you.
Yeah.
That is my duty, obligation, and ability. If I take any of that away, if you affect my feelings, I can affect your life. And that's what's going on. And nobody want to talk about that.
Yeah.
So you send me to a place, and if you don't like me, then you can take my job, take anything away from me, right? And then I'm Black, so I gotta kind of like be quiet and speak up at the same time. Who wants to live in a world like that?
Right.
You are sitting here and I can see that you like, damn, I remember when that thing happened. Yep, I see when that thing happened. But then we got to sit here and still be like, but we are fighting for something different.
Right.
On the other side of that thing, all I'm saying is, hey, if it's only 10 of us, take your 5 and my 5. Somebody got to have courage. It can't just keep being the one person.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King got his ass whooped. Malcolm X was ready to shoot people. But in the end, if you pay attention, what did Malcolm X say? Hey, man, this man might be right.
Mhm.
And that's how it happened. So no matter what words come out of my mouth, I have to make sure my actions match them.
Right.
Ethically, morally, and physically.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
it's been a journey, but it's worth every bit to see Lil Tron from the neighborhood be like, I'm going to college.
Yeah.
Like, we still that far back.
Yeah.
And it hurts, but it's like, man, dude, hey, yeah.
If that's where we starting, then that's where we start.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anna, what about you? What are some of the biggest?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I twitched over here and interrupted your flow. But I was getting that was really helpful what you were saying, because I think when I hear you say, why are we talking about race and not God? What I also think about is the fact that God has been co-opted into how we talk about race so much. And I heard you saying that too, Dr. Green. And I just think that so much of what we do in talking about culture, talking about all of these pieces are the challenges, is like, how do we talk about the Protestant work ethic in this work? How do we talk about purity culture? How do we talk about double predestination? That's my own tradition, okay? And how that creates a system of, I was saved from before birth if I'm white, if I'm rich, if I have a certain type of privilege, and y'all who are not, we don't know. God doesn't care about you in a certain kind of way. And so I think that is work that has to be done. And we don't talk about how does the Protestant work ethic create a system of cookies so that in racism work, then we start saying like, well, I did the workshop.
Right.
Where's my cookie? Right. I took my picture with so-and-so. Where's my cookie?
Yeah,
right. I've been doing my blog for blah, blah, blah amount of time. Where's my cookie? And so I think there's a lot of these pieces that we have to interrogate about how we have co-opted God and Jesus into this, and what is our particular work as Christians around all these ways that we are all tangled up in this, in our theology, in our hymnody, like what we sing, not just the word white or pure or something like that, but the way that we talk about Jesus' death and resurrection, right? And I think that sort of stuff, I really wonder if we're ever going to get to that point in the conversation where we can really dig into that.
That's right. Y'all all are preaching. So there's one more question I want to ask each of you, and I was contemplating whether we save this for the end, but I want to ask it now, because it has come out already, but I'm curious just to briefly name for each of you, what moral or theological commitments ground your anti-racism work, right? And that might seem obvious at this point, but naming it, I think, is worthwhile, because I wanted to, where is it rooted in terms of your faith? I'll start with you.
Well, I think I said one of them already, that Jesus was doing this work and that God intends us to untangle what we have tangled. And that I have heard a lot of people say, trying to kind of be really realistic or almost like cool, cynical, say something like, well, we're never going to solve racism in our lifetimes, and I'm not really sure if we'll ever save it. Well, we won't if we talk like that with each other. And just to throw out here, Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, who's a Buddhist teacher and scholar, who talks about the fact that if we all woke up tomorrow and said, we have to solve this, it would happen like that.
That's right.
That is the absurdity that is the reason why I focus so much on that, because think about coronavirus, for example. A disruption like that pandemic could immediately stop certain things that we did in relation to each other without even thinking about it. One example, or start wearing a mask, and how quickly we could adjust to the need to wear a mask in public. I remember one time I went to the grocery store. This was one of the few occasions that I forgot my mask at home. And when I jumped out of my vehicle and was going in the grocery store and had one of them old moments, I felt it in my body. And that wasn't a couple months after the pandemic had begun. And I'm illustrating that just in terms of the things that we think are permanent, the things that we think are inevitably real, that we continue to do into existence, can stop like that, can change like that, and we can find ourselves adjusting to a new way of being pretty immediately as a species, if we have to. But your point is well taken, and it's troubling at the same time of how slippery that really is. I mean, how close that possibility actually exists to right now, and yet waking up tomorrow and knowing that we've got so many different perspectives, so many different privileges, so many different focuses, you know, that it's right there.
That's right.
What about you, Manny?
I think Pastor Anna said it. She just said it. I think that the thing that grounds me the most is, all right, this is the best way I know how to put it. Everybody in here has been in a mall or store or a little shop, and you walk past and you wanted something. You probably had to borrow money, work overtime. Even if you do the thing away the next day, you felt good when you got it. That's how I look at challenges, period. Right? So for me, I wake up and I'm like, man, it's a pretty messed up day. All right, I'm gonna get up and go see what happens. I didn't like that. All right, I'm gonna go again. That person. So I walk into a church and this dude don't like me. He don't want to be there. His wife's there. He's old. It don't bother me to go sit with him and just poke at him, right? But I'm not poking at him to make him angry. I'm poking at him because I'm like, you ain't different. Ha ha. So eventually it comes out and he's like, I won't say his name, but like he's, all right, we'll go for a coffee. We'll sit at French Meadow and play chess. Yeah. And you're going to tell me about your life, even if you don't like it. Because guess why? You're not special. We all are.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that a lot of us forget that thing, that stewardship, fellowship, compassion. I ain't got a lot of grace. I'm working on it. Really am. But stewardship, compassion, fellowship, empathy are the things that drive me, because I was living across the street from a homeless encampment, and I can see all these people getting mad. Yes, they're breaking in, they're stealing our packages, whatever. And they also outside in a bunch of tents with no coats, while I'm sitting in a closet that I can barely put anything else in, because when the pandemic happened, I was shopping. So why not take all of this stuff outside and give it to them? And thank God that I did, because a week later, now they closed the homeless encampment and they gone. And I see 5, 6, 7 people wearing coats now. And I'm happy about that. And I'm not happy about it because, oh, I did a great thing. I'm happy because, one, I got a lot of closet space back. And I'm really, really happy about that. But the other thing is, wow, you're not cold. You actually wore the coat. You didn't go sell it and buy something or do anything. And that thing affects me more. And I'm a little impatient with God sometimes, because I'm like, okay, why can't we just keep doing that thing immediately? But the thing I'm starting to understand is, be happy that you get the chance to contribute.
Yeah.
That's my thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just happy to contribute.
Yeah. It's real.
Kelly, what grounds you morally and theologically in this work?
Well, I would say when the training that I was trained in, we started every training with the first chapter of the first book of the scripture, where God created humanity from male to female and everything in between and around, and God called it good.
Yeah.
And who are we and what have we done?
Yeah.
And that just keeps, if God said it was good, it's my job to make sure it remains good. So
Can I just mention this
wonderfully
thing?
captures the simplicity that Manny was talking about that we struggle with so much.
And that's what I was going right back to what Pastor Anna said, where we could just wake up and switch it. You see how hard simplicity is? It's like you could just wake up and not do that thing. But I won't.
Yeah. Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. Yep. That's why I'm a comedian at heart. Seriously.
It's funny.
Let's shift gears a little bit, and I want to ask each of you questions related to your work specifically. But before we go there, I do want to ask a question that also kind of situates this in the wider cultural context. So kind of on the heels of what we were just talking about. But we are all aware, proven by our lively and lovely planning conversation that we had the other day, that white supremacy is a ubiquitous reality that we all have to reckon with, regardless of will or want to.
Ouch.
It lives underneath, between, over the top of, and yet cloaks itself in ways that invite people of all experiences to deny their involvement in its maintenance. And so before I turn attention to these particular questions that I've tailored for each of you all, I'm wondering if all of you could share briefly about the way you make sense of this reality. In other words, what analysis of white supremacy's persistence in a wider culture that desperately wants to cast itself as post-racial would you give to somebody that wanted to understand? Because I think that that's a real question people have. The maintenance of this reality does not come out of a desire, I don't believe, at least a cultural malicious desire to perpetuate white supremacy. And yet it continues to recreate itself in every epoch of history. So what analysis would you give somebody that comes to you and asks you, how can this be?
That's deep, dog. That's deep. I don't want to go first.
Anybody? Yeah, I was gonna say.
I don't want to go first on that.
I'll let y'all choose who goes first.
Well, I'm just thinking a little bit about like if there's a way in which we tend to see participation in white supremacy as a personal moral failing.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that there isn't a way that, as you were saying, Manny, that we aren't going to wake up and like sin again, in some form, especially the closer we are to whiteness. And I say that as someone who is white presenting. So I'm taking that very seriously. When I do this work, I try to be careful to understand that while I don't say that I am white, because that's not my family, that's not my core identity, that's not how I am doing this work, but that doesn't mean that I don't get received that way sometimes. And that my proximity to that identity doesn't give me advantages.
Right.
So I take that very personally when I say that. But I think the way that we take it personally about our participation in white supremacy means that the question we're always asking is, am I a part of this? When we should be asking, how am I a part of this? Right? If someone was poisoning our water, would we say, is my water poisoned? It doesn't matter. I would try to find a way to purify the water. I would try to find a way to make my kids safe, right? And so instead of making it a personal moral failing, why couldn't we ask, how do I address this, instead of trying to find a place of absolution or innocence? And the more that we try to find innocence, and I say this also for as a part of the Latina community, there are Latina, Hispanic, whatever particular word you want to, there are folks out there trying so hard to be white and using rhetoric that is extremely dangerous because they want that door to open for them. And so I see that in some parts of the communities that I'm a part of, and I'm just aware of that this can be embodied in people of color in certain ways too. And I'm not saying that to lay equal blame, because white people have a particular way in which their kind of participation can replicate and do extra and particular harm. But there is a way in which we all have to be asking ourselves these questions and asking our Christian communities.
And if I can just jump in to piggyback on that from the perspective of this construct that exists, that it is the dominant culture, or the constructed me, if you will, of how we see ourselves or who we should be.
Yeah.
And that is that center that you talk about of whiteness. And that we don't, the post-racial conversation, there's a great comedian who says, oh, we have a Black president and Oprah's a billionaire. Race isn't an issue anymore.
Right.
And I always say President Obama wasn't elected because he was Black.
Right.
He was elected because he was very close to the center. He was educated. He was light-skinned. He could speak well. He was close. He had enough characteristics of the dominant culture that allowed white people to feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And so in that, but we create these tokens so that we can move beyond and intellectually or visually say that it's changed. And we haven't embodied this sense of what whiteness is and this construct that is affecting all of us and endangering all of us. And I think a lot of it has to do with comfort. It's painful, it's hard work, and people don't want to be uncomfortable. So to everything Anna said, that we don't want to look in.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Dr. Green, you said something really interesting. You said, how do we explain why it keeps happening?
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly believe it's culturally embedded in us to just accept that it keeps happening, right? However, we are now in spaces where we are doing real work, but there's another set of people getting paid. Let's not forget a lot of this work brings in money. So we keep skipping that part because it's uncomfortable to talk about. Like, of course, there's going to be people doing anti-racism work and embodying anti-racism work, right? Because they're going to get a paycheck. They're going to start a nonprofit. They're going to have a fundraiser, right? So the thing that boggles my mind is I'm not going to say too deep of a question, but like, I don't even think that's a question. I think it's a reality.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part, right? So when you say, okay, well, explain that. How do I explain the reality that you're going to be born? It's going to be some people that has a family that can take care of them decently. You're going to have to get through all of these dudes on the corner. Well, they're not really on the corner no more. But all of these dudes in your community, and you're going to have to get through all of these other people that had all these challenges and all of this stuff that happened to them. And you don't have really a guide because you have one person that's providing a house, shelter, and food for you. You have to navigate all of that, not see a young girl or a young boy get a disease or have a baby, and then make it to another space. Remember when you used to, okay, do anybody remember when we didn't have to go to college to be a nurse or a welder or like all of these other things that you have to take college courses for now?
Yeah.
That's the reality of your life when it's going to be another set of people that have parents that's like, oh, go be a nurse. All right. There go your college fund. And if you blow it, you can come home. Right. To where it's like, if you come back Foot Locker, you might be lucky if McDonald's like let you be the manager, or like if you get a real good job at Taco Bell. And nobody ever talks about this thing. A lot of these spaces that we get into is because we know people as well.
Right.
So like, what you asked, I think you explained the reality. I don't think that's a question.
And I think that's the answer.
I
think that what you just described illustrates how you can make somebody, how you can at least invite somebody to see something so that there's a level of understanding they have when they're navigating it versus, what they're doing in my home state of Texas, where it's like, let's wipe this completely from history so these kids have no idea what they're navigating because we don't want to traumatize them or we don't want to put racial consciousness into their minds.
We don't want to traumatize the white people.
Well,
That's you said it.
But the justification given is that we don't want to put this in them. And what that really means is I don't want them to see what's happening for what it is. I want them to be able to be in a situation where they can believe the myths that are told and the narratives, so that we can finally be post-racial, at least in our minds. And we know that that's not the reality. So how do we help people see the reality as it plays out on a daily basis in different people's lives across generations, across denominations and communities, in a way that helps them understand, right?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
At a certain point, because we have to get to that, how can we accept that some people gonna have different perspectives, and how can we work with the people that want to work with us? Because I think that and this is just a thought, I think that a lot of us have this like, the world is going to hear us and the world is going to accept it. The Bible tells us that's
No.
not the reality,
No.
right? So at a certain point, you have to know when to stop, because I think you actually need to halt
Mhm.
and pivot
Mhm.
for not just survival, but to continue the mission.
Mhm.
And I think that a lot of this work is so, as a person of color, you do a lot of soul searching
Mhm.
because there is a certain level of humility you have to have, one. And then two, how do you be humble enough to be humiliated repeatedly and consecutively while trying to help? And I think figuring out how to explain that to another group of people that go through those things, they just are financially better off, or they're so far reserved that they don't have to deal with the issue that we have to deal with. And I think my question is always, yes, this is our reality. And like you said, in Texas, they're trying to take it away. How? I already understand your reality and I don't even live in it. That's a shocker to you. So you're like, oh, I don't. It's like, dude, it's not that hard to figure out. How can you accept my reality? Until you can accept my reality, we can't do anything. And I think it's this weird space of like, how do we start to redefine grace? I think, especially in what we do. That's something I've been working on a long time. So I think one of the biggest questions I have is like, where is the moment we start redefining grace so we can start redirecting?
Yeah. Manny, I'm actually going to come back to you now. I want to ask some specific questions given where y'all are situated and the work that you're each doing. And so as someone who has lived and worked in North Minneapolis for a long time, and as a congregational organizer around anti-racism in the ELCA, how is the anti-racism work you do perhaps different from someone who does it in a predominantly white congregational or communal space? Because your audience is different, right? And so a lot of times we have these conversations about anti-racism and we talk about them oftentimes in predominantly white spaces. So then the audience is primarily white. But for you, as someone who is on the ground doing this work and your audience, well, I guess when you're going into churches, your audience is, but when you are in the community, I'm just curious what that looks like. How is that different in terms of how you get at that work?
In all honesty, none of it's different for me. Like even being here, lead with honesty, have compassion, be accountable.
Yeah.
So when I'm in a community and I see that it's a girl outside that's probably like 14, 15. I know you going somewhere you ain't supposed to be doing whatever you about to do. Here's $20, get in the Uber and go back to where you need to go to. Do it now, right? Because I know you're not supposed to be outside. I see the little boy that's got $1 in his hand and he unball it and he finna buy something, but he dump all the meth into his hand. It's like, hey, boom, I just dropped $40 worth of meth and you mad because you went all the way to Anoka or wherever to get it and you took a bus. But guess what? I love you enough. And if you want to punch me, I'm gonna punch you back. So like when I go into a church, it's no different. That's some really racist bleep you said, and I'm gonna say it. And if you, what are we doing here? Like, just lead with love. So, I would say when I was younger, I didn't understand that part, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm always trying to like, it needs to work now. It needs to work now. It needs to work now. And then I get older, and I see that none of these people are doing anything necessarily wrong. I believe I was listening to a sermon earlier today, right before I got here, and the best way that the guy explained this, he said the devil's job is to get you to do the right thing the wrong way. Boom. Holy moly guacamole. What? So if I can get you to do the right thing the wrong way, I got you.
Mhm.
Right? So I got to stop thinking that I'm doing this. This ain't me doing it. God want me here right now, and that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to do it the best that I can. But I will not do this thing that I see a lot of church folks do. I won't not be me.
Right.
That's how you mess it up. So I got to do it the right way.
And I want to build on that because you're speaking as someone who, and because I can relate to this, you grew up in your community, you know how to move in your community, but you've also, by nature of doing work in predominantly white spaces, you've also developed the ability to know how to move in those spaces as well. And so understanding that the dynamics are different, even where you might know how to show up honestly and authentically in multiple spaces, somebody else going into North Minneapolis may not. So my question then is, what would this person who didn't grow up in North Minneapolis, but who wants to do anti-racism work in North Minneapolis, what do they need to know about the dynamics that are different there than maybe where they're come from?
I love that question. First of all, in all honesty, you need support. So I can't ask you to come over here and do something and not stand by you. And that's what happens a lot of these times. And that's why a lot of these churches are just writing checks because who's standing by them? I came and did a workshop, go over there and volunteer. That would be nice. So who gives a damn about either side? Because that's the reality. I cannot call you up to be accountable and then just disappear because I got my check and I ran off.
Right.
There's work to be done, right?
Right.
And the thing that I look at the most is who's working and who's working,
Yeah.
right? It's a big difference. You come in and everybody's motivated and then they take your card and they're like, Manny, what do we do next? And I'll call you in 3 weeks. These people got lives too, right? So a lot of this work, if I don't have a partner church for your church to like actually connect to, then I'm not coming there. But if you ask me to find that thing, what I'm going to let you know is you're not going to write them a check and put them on your partner. And guess what? Half of these people need to come worship with you. Why don't you come over here and worship with them? When are we doing more of that? So if we're going to do this thing, you don't need to show up in my neighborhood and pick up all the trash. You need to show up and worship with me. And I need to be able to show up and worship with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the difference between all the congregations and gangs? I'm in 140 congregations and everybody's like, how do I make mine better? Where in life are we going to be together if it's all about you and yours?
Yeah.
Community. I think that's the biggest thing. Until you can get to a space in yourself, and that's a lot. Man, Reverend Anna said that the best. Until you can start dealing with what's in you. And that's how I try to give out. When I show up to a space to say anything, it's more or less, you need to challenge all of this that's fighting. Whatever's left and right that's fighting in you, you got to make a choice. And if you're going to sit down, we still going to love you.
Yeah.
But get out the way. Because some people actually want to be here. But to answer your question, because I went off, support. I cannot ask you to do something that I won't do with you.
Yeah. And what I hear in that, it really goes back to what you shared earlier about the priority of relationship in this work. If I'm going to show up in another space, knowing I may not know all the dynamics, or if you're going to show up in this space or whatever it is, if we're going to be able to move across these boundaries and build coalitions, build solidarity and all of that, it's going to begin with relationships and community.
Perfect example, right? There's a picture here, but as long as I'm here, every glass will get filled when mine gets full.
Which I appreciate, by the way.
Right? No, thank you. But I didn't do it to be appreciated,
Right.
and I didn't do it for this moment. But this is the perfect time to say that when you're doing this work, you got to understand that everybody got a glass, but you got to pay attention because a lot of them get empty because we done poured everything into this. These two women right here, this is a white presenting woman and this is a white woman. They get tired too. So who's there to stand up and say, I'm here to support you, right? Instead of going, all right, yeah, that white lady said, whatever. All right. And a lot of our people think like that.
Yeah.
And I'm not placing blame.
Right.
But at the same time, if we don't start working on building relationships, this is always going to be another panel, always going to be another job. And the hard part, especially in organizing, is burning out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Because if you burn out, you like, I got a degree, I can go do whatever now. I've tried to save my people.
Yeah.
I think just solidarity is a hard thing to do, but it is necessary to live the life that you want. So if I'm sorry, I know I'll try to make it quick, but does everybody notice how everything is about being an individual? Love yourself. Oh, you need to heal yourself. Oh, that was trauma bonding. Oh, let me explain something to you in a relationship. In a relationship, I'm going to project on you. In a relationship, something bad gonna happen. And guess what? We're gonna have to bond over that trauma. You gonna manipulate me. It's a relationship. And I'm gonna do the same thing. Relationship. But if we continue to sit here and say, love yourself, heal yourself, who's by us? So how are we gonna keep doing this work and everything is focused on you? We need to focus on us. But you got to find your us. I'm not gonna sit here and just, anybody. I'm saying that to say that when you start focusing on your home, your community, the congregation you go to, and then you gotta work within that, because it's like, hey, we got partners that want to partner with us. We gonna do it or not, and then you see who gonna be there. If it's 6 of us and it's 20 of them, now it's 26. Fine.
Yeah. Well, and I think you speak to, one of the pieces of this longer historical myth of being an individual, and specifically this priority put on individualism that has done us all in different ways. But since you mentioned what Reverend Anna said, I want to come to you next, Anna, and I want to, drawing on your work with mental health and addictions, as well as your role doing anti-racist formation within communities. How has your work with addictions and mental health uniquely positioned you to do this anti-racism work?
I think for me, when in the first couple weeks that I started this work, and I had just been in the hospital, and it was middle of COVID, right? And the toll that COVID took on patients who were already so fragile was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And the systems that were trying to pull people apart when we really needed to kind of be doing just one thing together, at least one thing, I was watching the toll of that on people's whose mental health was very fragile. And so then walking into a setting where people are supposedly stable, right? Are supposedly, we all have mental health issues in this room. We have mental health issues that we're dealing with, right? So I'm not trying to say like there's people in the hospital and then there's some everywhere else, but it is to say everyone is more or less stable in the community spaces that I was working in. And to just see the resonance, the way in which it's not the same what we're experiencing, but there are ways in which, as you said, Manny, before, sometimes I'm going to wake up and I'm going to choose the thing that doesn't work instead of the thing that does. And I am not putting that onto people with mental health and chemical dependency issues, because there are different dynamics there, but it is to say, what's my excuse? Right? What's my excuse? And again, this is not about excuses. It's to say, how do we see that the human condition is this stuckness sometimes? And that does come out of my basis in the Reformed tradition, where we kind of talk about being kind of stuck in loops and the net of ways that we aren't bringing life and thriving. So I think that I try to bring that to this work in the sense of, how do we recognize that some of the things that are getting in the way of the community building is that white spaces don't know what the word community means.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so we in our presbytery spent 3 years doing a navel gazing self-study just to learn that we don't know how to do community. And I know that offends some people in our spaces, because they say, what do you mean? I like the people that I go to church with. That's not what God's talking about when God says the word community. That's not what Jesus is talking about when Jesus says love one another, right? So I think, how do we re-understand that core human experience that comes from my experience listening to so many folks, but also recognizing that in our church spaces, we also pretend that we don't have these collective ways of thinking that are actually getting in the way of how we need to be together. So I always say to folks, like, if you want to do anti-racism work and you're in a space where you don't know how to really talk about race, or everyone in your congregation is white, for instance, talk about the word unity in scripture, talk about the word community, talk about the word love, and explode people's minds with what God really means by those words. And if you don't know how to start that, then look to the voices of scholars of color, especially Black and Indigenous Christian scholars, who can really help expand the thinking of why those words have become atrophied in our white spaces in Christian community. So that is one of the things I try to bring, because I don't think that we have a one-size-fits-all model of doing this work. But I do think that if everybody started talking about unity differently, if everybody started talking about the word peace, and what it didn't mean was we don't talk about this hard stuff. Because Manny, when you said, oh, if we were to get in a fight, or if I were to poke you, or whatever it is, white people see that as the ultimate rejection, and they lose relationships over things like that. And so I'm not trying to other that experience. I'm trying to say those things with love and invitation to touching on that common raw experience of being caught. And how can we unstick ourselves from that? So I think that goes back to the compassion piece you're talking about too.
Yeah.
I so want to hear you say more about this being caught. And the next question, I kid you not, had to do with what you already kind of briefly mentioned, when it has to do with the human condition. Right? And I'm curious how your work and your closeness to these issues that exist outside of the ways that people make sense of it in terms of morality, right? When you talk about mental health, when you talk about addictions, you're talking about something that you're having a conversation about how, based on our condition, what things we're susceptible to, that you can't just chalk up as you just are a sinner, right? And so I'm curious how that has made you more attentive to aspects of the human condition that talking about race in the context of morality cannot capture.
Right. I think for me, one thing that I've been sitting with even just in the last couple of days is, I use that metaphor of the water, right? Because I try to be careful about not using mental health and chemical dependency as a metaphor for this work, because it is such a different thing, and it has to do with actual brain chemistry. And, so it's so different. But it can help me learn maybe a little bit by analogy or by those resonances, right? Like, how does it help me see, like, oh, okay, there are ways that I might show up and do this, and I don't have a diagnosis. That's not maybe what I'm experiencing, but how do I see the human experience in what you're going through?
Right.
And so, going back to what you're saying, it makes me think about how beyond morality, the stuckness piece, the piece of how we have this sort of death wish in the way that we organize our societies, and we are willing to sacrifice almost anything to keep things as they are, because human cognition, we like things simple, and it's harder to move toward the unknown. It's harder to choose what we don't know already. And we would rather wake up tomorrow and have the same thing as today. And I'm not saying every person, because there are people who would absolutely choose something different, but collectively, we would rather choose the same. And we might even rather choose more of the worst same, because we know what that poison tastes like. And so, so I was just thinking, I won't read the whole thing, but this is a poem by Wendell Berry, old white guy, but who sometimes says some things that I'm like, my gosh, this is a word. And I just came across this poem today. It's called Questionnaire. And I'll just read the first and the last. And this is where the poison piece came from. He says, question one, how much poison are you willing to eat for the success of the free market and global trade? Please name your preferred poisons. For the sake of goodness, how much evil are you willing to do? Fill in the following blanks with the names of your favorite evils and acts of hatred. Number 4, in the name of patriotism and the flag, how much of our beloved land are you willing to desecrate? List in the following spaces the mountains, rivers, towns, farms you could most readily do without. And 5, state briefly the ideas, ideals, or hopes, the energy sources, the kinds of security for which you would kill a child. Name, please, the children whom you would be willing to kill.
Yes.
And that's the human condition, in part. That's not all of who we are. We are made for connection. We are made for
Right.
community, but we also have that in us.
Yeah, fragile.
And so we have to deal with the both and of that.
That's good. That's
That's
good.
good.
That's good. Thank you for that. Golly, I don't even want to ask the last question, 'cause
I know.
that was so juicy. But I am curious, lastly, before I move to you, Kelly, Anna, if you could talk about what are some of the embodied dimensions of this that we need to be mindful of, right? You talked earlier about how this exists also in our bodies. It extends from our bodies, it converges on our bodies, that our embodiment is central to this conversation. So I'm just curious what comes to mind as you think about what are some of the elements of our embodiedness when we think about anti-racist work that we need to be mindful of.
I think 2 things come to mind, but obviously there's so much, but one I think of is the hunger that people who have white bodies have to be in proximity to people of color, and particularly Black and Indigenous people. I would say there's a way in which that tokenization exists,
Yeah.
but only in ways that are palatable and comfortable to them.
That's right.
And so what is it in the body that gets activated, in the white body that gets activated I'm asking people who have white bodies, what is it that gets activated in you when you are presented with diversity not on your terms?
Yeah.
Right? With bodies of color, not in ways that make you comfortable and that cater to your comfort, right? When you are challenged by a person of color,
Yeah.
when they aren't trying to be nice to you.
Right.
What does that do in your body?
That's good.
So I think that is an interpersonal level. And then I think for people of color to just, I think constantly about how those spiritual capacities apply to people of color too, because the work of undoing the trauma that the epigenetic trauma, right? The generational trauma that shows up in bodies of color, and understanding that with compassion instead of pathologizing it, right? And turning against our own communities and saying, well, you don't X or you don't Y. And you heard me say it before when I was talking about the Latina community. I see why some of those Latina people are doing that. And I try to react with some degree of compassion and some degree of hopefully honesty and clarity about why that is dangerous.
Yeah.
But I think to go on that journey is an embodied journey, because it shows up in the body, and without giving time, attention, space, and care to that, there isn't enough room to have grace for the kind of relationships you're talking about,
Yeah.
Manny, because there's a reason. I know you know this, but I'm just saying there's a reason why people of color are like, I'm not in for that. You know? So yeah, I think those are pieces.
That's good. Thank you, Anna.
Yeah.
Kelly, I'm thinking about just your vast experience across congregational and conference leadership in UCC circles. And so I'm curious, if you think about your work in the UCC, what particular challenges and or opportunities do you see in the UCC regarding the work of racial justice? Kind of a denomination specific question, and then we'll come to something more not denominational.
Sure. Well, I think it is both the blessing and the curse of the United Church of Christ is it's a upside down hierarchy. We see the locus of mission and ministry at the congregational level at the local church. And I think that allows us to address churches where they are. And so that it really allows for that specific relational work. And so I think that is a plus of the United Church of Christ, which sets us up. And also, we don't pretend that the wider church has any particular wisdom, but with the negative side of that is we also don't invest in that. So as you can see, I sit here next to two colleagues whose work is to do this work.
Mhm.
And I'm a generalist. And even when it was my portfolio, I was a generalist because I think on some level, we lose that capacity to say, hey, we could actually throw some resources
Right.
at it. And even, so I think that's the plus and the minus of saying, hey, church, you're the boss. And therefore we then don't necessarily invest our resources in places that might be useful.
Yeah. Nice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Shifting gears, and I really want to just to pick back up on something you began to share about earlier, but what explanation would you give to a well-intentioned or well-meaning white person who believes they don't need to do anti-racism work because they're either not overtly racist or because they don't live around Black people? Maybe they're in a rural setting and it's an all-white community, and so this work doesn't feel necessary. What explanation would you give to someone that?
Well, now I'm going to say what Anna says about unity and community and love. But prior to that, I think one of the main things is, as I said, I would start with myself saying, it's never done. So folks who say, I've done it, it's never done. It's ongoing work. But also I would say that you don't, white supremacy and white-bodied supremacy and white privilege doesn't need people of color to operate and exert power. And so to say that we all participate in a corporate environment, we pay taxes to a predominantly white male-led military. We elect a predominantly white male-led country. So we participate in all of that. I don't need this. I'm not even using the notes. And so I would just begin there. And also to say that in just the question of an all white space, we live in a place where we're all white people. Well, why is that? Let's talk about that ability to be in an all white space. Why is it that there aren't people of color here? And actually there probably are. How do you not see them? So those are the, just to start poking at the questions of the water.
Yeah.
You're in this water, all white water. Why? How? Do you see the privilege in that? And then also, I think to say that the tenets of white supremacy affect everyone, and the reality of just even in the church, the preference for a large urban church over a small rural church is a white-bodied supremacist tenet.
Right.
Bigger, better, larger. And so our small rural churches are suffering from this white-bodied supremacy, this white supremacy mentality in the same way. And that is because we believe that bigger is better and centralized is more important, and rural and smaller and poorer is less important.
Right.
And that's white supremacy.
Right.
So those are I try to, first say it's not done, but also find those, and Manny, I've learned so much from both of you tonight, but find those connections. We are all suffering under white supremacy.
And I can really appreciate that, not only just pointing out the water for people, but also allowing people to see the ways that they too are suffering as a result of this broader thing that has been created and maintained. That it's not just Black people or Latin people suffering from this, but that everybody is subject to this as human beings. And so I'm also curious to hear you speak to. So you convince somebody, right? You sell them on like, okay, now I need to take this seriously. And invariably the question is, okay, well, what do I do? How do I get started? How would you tell somebody who is really starting from zero to begin this work in a way that you would hope they would sustain it?
It's such a great question. Well, I think what I thought of when this question came before me before was the idea to check your algorithms. Who's on social media, right? Everything we receive is curated for us.
Yeah, nice.
So if you look at your Facebook, you look at your TikTok, you look at your Netflix, what is being given to you? Is it all white? That's because that's the food that you've chosen to eat. And so I would just say, take a little time, sure, I would venture to guess that all of my colleagues who are well-meaning, that is the word I love, receive the tragedies that happen
Right.
in the communities of color. But do we receive, just as a matter of course on our Facebook feed, the celebrations?
Yeah.
Do we know the gentleman who was given an eagle feather today by a high school, right? Do we get the museum things? Do we know that Beyonce has a new hair color? I mean, a new hair product called Sacred, right? Do we know these things because they come across our feed?
Yeah.
And that's intentional work.
Yeah.
And it's simple. And I think the last thing is that, we believe as white people, or I don't know, it's not even a chosen belief. We've been taught that everything's for us. It's for us. And we're not comfortable with things that aren't for us. And thankfully, we're finally living not finally, there have always been things that weren't for us, but we didn't have access to them. And I would say, spend a little time engaging in things that weren't made for you. They just weren't, because people of color have had to live in a world of things that weren't made for them.
Yeah.
Right. And find music that wasn't made for you, and celebrate it, engage it for the beauty that it is, and try to wonder about the community for whom it was made for.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's just the beginning of saying, just that opening, seeing like, oh my God, they never thought about me when they wrote that song.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a big learn. I think just starting there.
Yeah.
And then the uncomfortableness, I think finally for me, that learning that it's not the role of people of color to forgive you for doing something stupid and just accept you're going to do something stupid. And don't seek forgiveness for it. Certainly apologize.
Yeah.
But start to live in the reality that we are just tromping all over people as a matter of course, and try to stop.
Yeah.
That's,
Thank you. Yeah.
begin there.
The last question I want to ask you, Kelly, before we go into the Q&A period is it has to do with something you shared the other day in our planning conversation that I thought was especially inspiring and enriching. And it was about the idea that we need to engage this work regularly as something sacred, both in terms of its significance and as a ritual practice. So could you say a little bit more about what that means and perhaps what that looks like when we think about our daily lives?
Well, when I think of Jesus, I think of so much of his work was helping people see people that weren't seen. That his work was using his space to make room for children, for women, for the marginalized, and say, these are people too. And so I think a part of the sacred work is just trying to see daily, to pray that we can see.
Yeah.
And to try, and as I said before, to try to just move into uncomfortable spaces and realize that not everything is for us, but everything is for us,
Yeah.
for everyone. And I think it's just a daily, and also I brought this because when that question, I was like, well, just read this book.
Yeah.
My grandmother's hands. And I mean, just the breathing exercises, I think, Anna just said it so beautifully, the embodiment, the importance of just breathing into the discomfort, to breathing into the history, the trauma of our own, know our own story.
Yeah.
And so that's where I would suggest that people begin.
Thank you. I think we should give the panel a round of applause at this time. Thank you all for the perspectives that you brought, the passion that you're bringing to this work and to this conversation. It's 8:23. We have some time for Q&A. And then Emily, I might draw on you to help make an announcement about the breakouts, but for about 7 to 10 minutes, let's go ahead and just open the floor for any questions that people might have of any of the panelists.
And I will read out questions in the chat.
Okay.
So folks
All right.
from the Zoom, please feel free to share what you'd like.
Right?
Thank you all so much. In your work, how do you navigate the necessity to end violence now and this long-term interpersonal work that you've been talking about the whole time?
I'll start. That's a great question. It's a really good question because with working in Minneapolis and then being a youth mentor, seeing your youth grow up, have 2 kids, and then be killed, you feel like you kind of failed at a certain point, right? Because I can't stop them from listening to whatever they listen to. I can't stop them from watching whatever they're watching, but I can support. And like you said, stop violence. Now, I think a lot of it has to do with, does anybody notice that youth don't come to church anymore? It's no youth in church. No matter the denomination, no youth are coming in. But if we can remember pre-pandemic, we had what was those lock-ins and overnights, and we would volunteer over here. What happened to all of the youth programming, right? Because a lot of the violence that at least we seen is in a very young space with young people. So I would say we need more programming, but not just programming, more actual physical support in a lot of the communities that I'm in.
I really appreciate you saying that, because I think even just bringing up the youth piece is so important, because that cuts across demographics in different ways, right? Like, I'm not saying that it's the same experience or dynamics, but that has been an experience that I've seen online. My sister's a youth director, so she's definitely experiencing it. And there are different reasons that it's showing up in every community. But I do think that our youth are having an experience of living with existential despair that we as adults have created for them. And I'm saying that as a millennial who, like, I mean, like, how much did I create? I don't know. But the point is I'm here now and I'm an adult. So, and so the point is how do we create experiences that have meaning and have that kind of support that is needed right now? I think mental health is really important for youth in ways that our white congregations are not prepared for sure. The other thing I'm thinking about when you ask that question is harm reduction, right? Because addiction is not going to end tomorrow. Mental health, critical crisis level mental health issues are not going to end tomorrow, but harm reduction is incredibly powerful, right? If you have the capacity to help someone who's about to die from their addiction get medical support through having Narcan on hand, for instance. Narcan is a drug that reverses the effects of certain drugs and allows people to live long enough to get to the hospital and possibly seek treatment. You are giving them another chance. And sometimes, and I've often talked to people who have received Narcan, then come to the hospital and so on and so forth. And they're like, oh my God, I have another chance. Right. So how do we believe that harm reduction matters, even in a context where it doesn't feel like it does? I look to actually climate activists. I don't know if any of you know about Mossy Earth. It's this really beautiful organization online on YouTube. And basically they try to save hermit crabs and forests and this one little prairie dog that lives in one field somewhere, and they raise money to do it. And then they do very extensive scientific studies about it. The point is I watch those videos and I go, this is what Christian hope looks like.
Yes.
It's to care about a single prairie dog or one newt in a lake somewhere and to say that newt matters. And I might say to God, but that's not what they're thinking about. They're just saying it matters. And so I think that for us to say, what can we choose that matters in our spaces, and how can, in especially all white or mostly white Christian spaces, how can we see that every community needs community care? Every community needs those sorts of interventions. And how do we have an urgency about that too? Because that is also anti-racism work.
Amen.
I would also say in response to your question, Ray, that um, thinking of harm reduction at the policy level too. We talk about the interpersonal pieces and even thinking about this language of myth versus material consequence. And you know, well as anybody, a lot of the work I do has to do with myths that have been concocted and portrayed about Black men, particularly Black athletes, understood as beasts, these kind of physical beasts, and that has a particular racist history. Well, it's going to take time to disentangle that from the minds of people like Derek Chauvin, who will approach a Black man through that lens and see that when he's confronted with someone. But it can also be at the policy level where if using lethal force is not an option in this situation, that will act to reduce harm. And what we know, in reality, it's created between these ways that we perform in relation to each other, in relation to policies that have been created. So what is permissible, what's allowed, what is not allowed, will shape how we relate to each other. And I think we need to take seriously harm reduction at a systemic, particularly when it has to do with state violence level.
Yes.
I want to draw your attention to the chat. How optimistic are each of you that in this country, in our churches, that the word of God, the work of Jesus will prevail?
How confident are you?
There we go.
I think that's the real question, is how confident are you and all of us together, and how are we choosing that kind of audacious hope?
That's for sure.
I ask myself this question every day. I'm not gonna lie, I am with you. I am with you. It may sound very old school, but I don't think I think about that. I think about the work, and me doing the work is Jesus prevailing, because we are up against the fight. We are doing this daily. So don't forget that Jesus prevailing is us getting up and choosing to continue.
Yeah,
Um,
that's good.
yeah.
And I often say to our churches, they're not our churches, they're God's churches. And that the church will prevail, the church, God's work will prevail. We can't kill it. It will go on.
Yeah.
And so and our job, as you said, is to just get up and do it. So I'm optimistic that there will be those who will get up and do it.
Yeah, and just thinking about what you just shared, Kelly, in terms of thinking of this in terms of God's work prevailing, God's work outlasting anything that we can do to undo it, but also with that being open to the fact that church might look different.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yes. It's not good.
That what church is, how we understand. I mean, just think about even how we've interpreted the things that Jesus has said over the years. It's going to continue to change. We're going to continue to learn. But to your point, Manny, if we continue to get up and engage, that is, to me, a testament of the work prevailing.
Yes.
I just want to say, when you ask the question, how optimistic are you that in this country, in our churches, that's what sticks out to me, right? Because I understand what you're asking.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is that where two or more are gathered, that is church. And we have to continue to get back and to remember that thinking, because we are living in a world where we will go to church and everything is political now.
Mm.
So where are you finding God? I think that is the question to ask. Where is God in what you do? If you find no God in what you do, maybe it's time for something new. Didn't mean to do the Dr. Seuss rhyme, but that's how it came out.
That's how God wanted it to sound. I also think can we just, I think we're doing it as we're talking, but just to name that when we talk about the word of God and the work of Jesus prevailing, that we can often take a corporate business model and overlay that and think that's what God meant or what Jesus meant. Jesus did not mean I will have an elaborate institutional structure made up of different denominations in which people will fight about whether the bread and the wine are this or that.
At
Like,
10 o'clock on
that
Sunday
was not
morning.
Jesus' vision for us. And it's not because of the Reformation. It's because Jesus did not envision a corporate model of who
Amen.
would follow.
Right.
We are only called to be followers. And so when we think of our budgets and we think of whether we have institutionalized and calcified Christianity into our government
Yes.
as prevailing, I'm not saying that that's what's behind the question. I'm just saying, can we be careful
Yeah.
that when we talk about that, that we aren't accidentally thinking that that's what we mean.
That's right. Thank you.
I have an anonymous one from the chat. If I
I think
may.
that we got time
Then
for
we,
this
and
one.
then we've got to move into our breakout rooms. Yep. What are we saying are the ecumenical possibilities for formation of becoming an anti-racist collective? How might we work together in the face of barriers such as white Christian nationalism, those of us who believe differently about the inclusion of all persons in leadership, etc.?
Excellent last question.
That was good. Oh, man.
Yeah, what would be kind of each of your last word when it comes to the theme of tonight and what some of the ecumenical possibilities that you all see?
That's hard for me. I don't see limitations. I don't. I think that we are creating them, and it's going to take us to individually become collective together. So as we ask these questions, are you challenging your friends when they do something that you don't like or you deem unethical or unmoral? Right? I was literally, oh man, I don't want to tell y'all my personal business, but I'm gonna explain it to you real quick, right? So I'm in a situation and I'm like, man, I could do this because they'll just pay me and let me go away because I don't have to do this thing. And somebody said, yeah, but as much as you talk about these people and their ethics, could you live with it? That's where God showed up. Because I was talking to God the whole time and I thought I was right. And then I had the conversation and there's like, God was like, no, you don't. So how do we continue to do that? We have to accept that we are one person. I think Reverend Anna has explained this greatly. You need to embody who you are no matter what the skin color is. But this is just my mind, right? You need to embody that. And then you need to pick. You need to pick if you're going to stand up or sit down. You are still loved. But this work is not the fairy tale that most people think it is because it's actual work. Right. So we can put all these fancy words up and we can have 8 more panels. I'd love to do it. This was fun. But we can have a room of 1,000 people. If 5 of them leave, and then you have 995 people that's like, I'm gonna do it later. That's the thing that I see the most. Like, where do you accept that it's not easy? Jesus, it wasn't an easy life. That's the perfect example. So when you tell me you're raising funds for a new room in a building or something like this, I'm kind of like, well, Jesus hung out with prostitutes. They was gambling. He was healing homeless people. He fed a bunch of people, and you get a new room and you're like, whatever, you're building something or expanding it. And you make that make sense to me, but also be brave enough to understand that you may not be getting a stipend anymore because you're going to ask and you're going to wonder why that's happening. And a lot of us can't do that because, and I'll end with this, the reality in real life, for a lot of people, it's a job. So it's not a reality. They don't go home and think about this. They like, I got these people to say yes. I went over here and I seen this senator. I went and seen these delegates. I got these people to write in to do this. And then they go home. So it stops, right? And I'm not saying your whole life needs to be surrounded by it, but if you're going to do it with purity.
I was going to say, if we're thinking ecumenically, I think the possibilities there are, how do we understand collaboration and diversity being both important? So collaboration, meaning we can collaborate without all doing the exact same thing.
Yes.
We can collaborate with all being the same person, right? So we've talked before about theologically at the core, we are not different, but we are embodied differently. and so how can that richness of not just our individual embodiments, but also our faith traditions? So if we're talking ecumenism, like how can I bring the Reformed tradition to the table with all of its warts, which there are many, to the table in a way that creates a rich conversation that we can all be a part of? Or how can I say like, well, that's going to inform some of the things that we do that might not be as critical for another space that I'm participating in ecumenically? So like, how do we allow ourselves to be, like we were talking about yesterday, there are lots of ways to find freedom in this world, right? And so collaboration is not, we all have to do it the same way. Collaboration is, oh, you're doing that. Oh, the comedy thing that you're doing, like that is incredible. Is there a piece there that we could collaborate on even as we pursue our own, right? So I think all of those things are where we need to be in conversation, because our rural congregations, our urban congregations, our suburban congregations, our individual denominations, we're all doing this work, and yet we are not nearly in enough dialogue.
No.
Can I just add that, like you said, when you take that comedy piece, don't just take the piece and be like, we got it now. We don't like, she explained it perfectly. You have to want to build a relationship in order to do anything. And lastly, you can't want to build just for you. It won't work. Oh, well, we do things this way and we're not going to do that. If you're not willing to try, if you're not open, then you're not ready. And you need to understand that you're not ready.
You good?
All right, we're going to break into some small groups for a few minutes. Stick around as long as you can. Our panelists have agreed to stay for kind of a soft ending. Thank you so much for joining us. We will not reconvene as a group. So stick around as long as that conversation is something you want to discuss. And right,
And then there.
and then there are cookies and water out here for the folks who are here in person. Thank you for being with us, and we'll get the recording out to folks as soon as it's ready.